Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Business Insights Online Network for June 2025, 2024. Sorry, I'm making all sorts of blunders this morning. Um, so we're here today talking about language for business. How do we, when we manage people, when we manage teams, when we look to get results and grow our business, we're using language almost all the time, and it's very underestimated. It's something we're looking at with the business shows we run around the place. Um, and we've got some fascinating content coming up, working with uh, people in entertainment, illusionists, magicians, comedians, a laughter coach. And all of these things are based out of the world of entertainment, which of course themselves are businesses, but actually those people use language in a very specialist way and don't and often when you're a performer, things come very naturally. You don't actually even think about it yourself. So we've been taking time to actually explore with those who use language proactively in the case of, for example, an illusionist or a comedian to create a result. And then that's part of a performance, which hopefully entertains. But actually, if we take that learn and we reflect on business, a lot of the time in business, I go possibly most of the time, we are actually performing in a different way. You know, if you're in a networking event like this, you're saying to yourself, how am I putting myself over in the right way? What am I saying? What am I doing? If you're in front of a team or you're motivating a team, what language are you using? How's that going on? Now, all this falls into the land of emotional intelligence. Um, so I've got two people I'm going to talk to today. One is definitively and absolutely in the world of emotional intelligence. That's Vicky Henderson, who I'll ask to introduce yourself in a moment, a little bit further and tell us a little bit about your background. And then Jane Balaam from Reward Risk Management. I know fully understands and uses emotional intelligence all over the place. So we asked Jane to come and get involved. And also, actually, when Jane speaks and talks to her clients about staff retention and recruitment and values, I'm absolutely sure we're going to find that the language that is used and how staff are treated, which is what it comes down to, is very important. So first of all, Vicky, can I just ask you to introduce yourself for those maybe watching this later and a little bit of where you come to be, where you are now?
Okay, yes. So my journey in emotional intelligence started back in 2017 when I trained in NLP and set up my original business, which was Ascend Performance Coaching. And I specialized in emotional intelligence and how that applied to the business world, both through personal leadership and business leadership. That has subsequently evolved into working with young people as well, who are a group who predominantly have some of the lowest levels of emotional intelligence, based on recent research out of America, and how those young people manage themselves, but also make that transition into work where things are very different. They're often not work ready, so to speak, from an attitude point of view, and they're coming up against very different cultures and things as they make that transition. So that's just a little bit about me. Emotional intelligence underpins everything that I do, and I can see it from both the business side and also from the young people side.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vicky. Jane, would you just say hello again and tell us a little bit about you, your business, and your world in this kind of dialogue?
Yes, right. So Jane Balaam, I'm from Reward Risk Management, and our job is to help companies to make really good decisions about how they pay their staff and what benefits they give them. But part of that is about the communication side of things, and how you tell people what you're giving them will impact on how they feel about it. And sometimes people lose sight of that. But also, part of it is also about performance, because individual salaries are usually related in some way to the people performing well enough to have earned a salary. And getting teams to work together and people to work as part of teams is often part of the problem. So we spend a lot of time coaching people to work with their teams in the right way to help them build their earnings potential.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Vicky. So I've got a few questions here, and you'll be pleased to hear Jane and Vicky have had a chance to see those questions ahead. I'm not going to completely blindside them. Well, you don't know that, not of course, but there you go. But I think the question I want to start with, and I'll ask both of you to sort of give your own personal responses to each of the questions we look at. Um, but just to start at the very sort of top of this conversation, we use language in business. That's a bit of an obvious statement, but for the purpose of what we're doing here, it's, we do use it in many different ways. I'd ask each of you, in your professional experience, how do you see the importance of how we use language in our day-to-day business dealings? Jane, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'm going to start with something that we all do unconsciously as professionals, and that's that we use language in a way that can be excluding with the people and teams that we're working with. The acronym RRM, to all the people who know me, fairly obviously means reward risk management, but to the people who don't know me, it's just RRM, and that's kind of it. But when we're working with teams and when we're working with our business dealings, we need to make sure that we're putting things into plain English and not using the typical acronyms. I mean, most people will see NLW, but not everybody will understand that stands for National Living Wage. These are the sorts of things that we do unconsciously because it's the language that we know, but actually excludes other people from understanding our communications when we're in business.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I mean acronyms. I have two children, three children, but two of them, one of them's an army officer and one of them's a nurse. And occasionally when we're all together, the world of acronyms can just completely take over. You have to say, oh my word. And you're right, of course, we all do it. We all refer to things that we're used to. But it's not an inclusive piece of language. You're absolutely right. Vicky, what's your take on that question about the importance of how we use language day to day?
Well, I mean, similar to Jane, it's absolutely vital. Um, it's it's not just about the words either. Lots of people think language is just about the words. It's about the body language. It's about the fact that we all speak English, but we don't necessarily speak the same language, depending on our culture, our upbringing, the country that we come from. And the language that we use will trigger emotions. Which emotions are people feeling? Are we aware of that? The language we use can create connection or disconnection, depending on the language that we're using and who we're talking to. It can create understanding, misunderstanding. As Jane said, it can be inclusive or exclusive. There's the whole jargon, there's cultural phrases. And then I think the really big one in here for language is listening. That might sound completely ridiculous, but are you listening to reply or are you listening to understand? Because if you're not listening to understand what the other person is saying, if you're not listening to their language, it's going to be very difficult for you to use any language that will connect with them. The more you can listen to the language that's going on around you, the better you will be able to, change your language to match that other person. So it's absolutely vital. And I think the more we dig into it and really consider and reflect on the language we use, we'll start to see some patterns in the way that we function, but also some areas that we maybe need to change or some stuff that's working really well. And that's great. And I can work on that.
Brilliant. And you're touching there, and we'll come back to it later, reactivity, which obviously is, we all do it, and we all do it in different ways and to different levels. And we'll come back a little bit to that. But before we go there, team dynamics. I mean, we're obviously we all work in teams, even if it's only you and one person who works with you. Even if you're in your domestic world, you work in a team. If you work in a larger team, if you are responsible for running a team, those dynamics are really important. So this is sort of an obvious answer to this question, but I'm interested to get your thought on it. How much thought and planning do you think we should be putting into the language we use in the process of running, managing and those teams on a day-to-day basis? Vicky, do you want to sort of carry on there where you left off and take that one?
Yeah, I mean, I've got noted down here more than we think. A lot of people are very reactive, as you said, but actually, if you want to really build team dynamics and really build something very special, you do need to put that time and planning into it. What tools have you got available? What do you know about these people? Do you know about their professional lives and their personal lives? Are there psychometrics available that your organization uses? And are you able to then use those to inform your thinking about how you communicate with people? Um, are there any learning or neurodivergent needs that need to be considered within the teams? You know, do you need to be direct or indirect with people? If you're indirect as a leader, generally speaking, it causes more problems than good because not everybody is indirect. If you're talking to another indirect person, brilliant, but loads of those people are going to be direct. So it's about you saying, actually, I know I'm not a very direct communicator. I need to work on that because being direct is better across the board generally than being indirect. There's an amazing company that I'm about to start doing some work for, and they've developed a thing called tone tags. So when they're communicating by email or by text message, because they have lots of different people and lots of neurodivergent individuals, they will put a tone tag on the end so that people understand the missing bits. And I'll come back to the missing bits later.
Brilliant, lovely. And I would just add to something you've been saying there that's just strikes a chord with me that says there's the factor here also understanding whether you deal with this stuff instinctively and naturally or whether you know that you don't. Because if you don't, then it is something that is important. Whereas sometimes if you deal with something instinctively, that's helpful, but you can then also take things for granted, and actually that itself can then hang on. Why am I reacting like that? It might feel the right thing to do, but is it? Jane, what's your take on that whole question about the time and the planning that needs to go into these things?
No, I completely agree with Vicky. It's absolutely essential that you know your team is an audience, as well as your clients or anyone else that you're working with. So when you're giving them important messages and when you're dealing with them, you've really got to focus on what they need to hear from you in order for the communication to be a two-way process. I mean, we often talk about communication, and we have you communicated this message, but I'm waving my hands around here and you cannot see me doing it, so I'm going to do it up here. It's two-way. You should be talking to each other and you should be connecting. Often when we're doing benefit stuff, people say to me, well, we've told them 1,000 times what their benefits are. I say, yeah, but have they heard you? Have they fed back that they've actually heard what you said? And when you don't get that, when it doesn't happen, then it can affect team dynamics. It can affect how people feel about the team they're working in. If they're only hearing but not understanding what you're saying. So you've got to be, as Vicky says, you've got to be really direct and clear with people, and you've got to put the effort into making sure the message you get across is direct and clear.
Yeah, brilliant. And there's a comment I'll lob in there, and we'll park and maybe come back to later as well, in that sometimes, if you're in a situation, Vicky made the comment earlier, and you both made the comment, are you listening? You've got two ears, one mouth, use in proportion, that thing we've all heard in the past. And you need to listen to your team. But as a team leader, there's also a time when you need to take over and manage the conversation so that you're now directing. And that subtle shift, the language that's used in it and how it's done, it can sometimes be a real mystery and sometimes be a real challenge. We will come back to stuff around that later on, I think, but actually planning that through and knowing what we're trying to achieve out of this is really important. Okay, so look, when we come to communicate, you alluded to it there, Jane, we use body language, we use tonality, and we use language itself. Those are three things that have got their own dynamic, their own use, their own activity, and we ignore any of them at our peril. I wonder, how do you see these things fitting together in terms of managing teams and situations and in different contexts, and what has different significance when? Jane, do you want to pick up and run on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we're dealing with now that we didn't have before is this online situation. And I think one of the biggest issues that companies are trying to address at the moment is how they deal with team dynamics when you've got online situations, because you have lost a lot of the communication process. You can't see people waving their hands around in excitement or people being really, really cross in the same way, because it's much easier to mask your language, your body language, and you can mute your tone and use different tones to reflect things, but you can also mask how you're actually feeling. People can't see your eyes clearly, and all the signals that we get that tell us what that people understand or are connected or disconnected with our message are muted by the screen. So it's really, really difficult when you're managing a team to ensure that you've got an engaged team that you're talking to. And so you've got to find ways that include and draw people into into the conversation and into the messages that you're trying to get over, checking that they're understanding it, checking that they've heard it, and you've got to make things more engaging. And I think that's, it's really, really difficult to do that. I mean, I think tone is one of the worst things in the world, language-wise, because we don't always understand. I've got a friend who's very professional, even in her personal emails, and she comes across as being very didactic and very, when she says, let's do this, it sounds like it's an order, not an invitation. And that's because you're hearing it in her tone, but that's not how she is.
That's really interesting, because a comment you hear occasionally, I've heard a few times recently in discussing in brand discussions, so not necessarily about management, but actually then move into what is the tone of voice of our brand. Now that's a great analogy of a discussion. Obviously, clearly a brand doesn't have vocal cords, but what it's saying is, how is our brand coming over? And I can see Matt smiling there. I'm sure you're in this space all the time. But actually, how is our brand communicating? And it's the same thing. And the dynamics that we run on screen versus the dynamics run in person, you're absolutely reversing, aren't you, exactly what you're dealing with. We pick up an untold amount of body language when we're sitting around having a natter with somebody in a coffee shop or face to face, which you don't get so much here. Vicky, what's your take on all this?
Well, I'm completely with Jane. We all try to mind read to fill communication gaps, and we're all rubbish at it. And I think that's the first thing to be aware of. Be really aware that when you're not face to face in a room with somebody, you're immediately starting to lose elements of the communication. So be aware of what you're noticing. If you imagine, as Jane was saying, on a Teams or a Zoom call, you're only from here up. What's happening below that? You can still tell a lot from the face, but only if you're tuned in to what you're looking for. And if you're not, then you're not going to pick it up necessarily. When you're on a phone call, your mind is filling that 55% gap because there's no body language. And what's it filling it with? Exactly as Jane was saying, she's here, she's filling it with this person when she's getting those, like, let's do this. Likewise, you go to text and email, everybody's favourite form of communication. We're down to 7% now, okay? 93% body language and tone gap. So we're filling it all in and we're adding stuff that just simply isn't there. So if you're unsure, it's really important that you repeat back your understanding to the person you're communicating with and just say, just to check I've understood this properly, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll go, no, that wasn't what I meant. But you've avoided the misunderstanding and the argument because you've asked. And the other one is just ask for more information. So I'm not sure I've quite understood that. Can I ask for more information? Just having the courage to do that. And then I think the last thing in here is that the meaning of our communication is the response that we get. So if you communicate in a certain way and you're not getting the response you're expecting, you've got to think about how you're going to say that differently so that the other person really hears it. And then also remember that the response that you get is not about you, it's about them. So if you're not getting the response you expect, actually, is there something going on that you need to know about in order for them to really hear what you're talking about? I could go on forever about this, but there's all sorts of stuff going on. And I think the big thing here is the more we aware we are of all of this, the easier it is to communicate effectively.
And I think the piece I would observe, and it comes out through both what you were saying. There's a moment we all remember the pandemic, and we've come to Zoom, and we all use Zoom. And before the pandemic, I wouldn't say Zoom wasn't a thing, but it wasn't much of a thing. A lot of us didn't really know about it, and we would turn up and we would talk to people in person. And over the pandemic, I got to know somebody quite well on a series of calls. And this was a straightforward networking situation. And we talked a lot and we got to know quite a lot about each other's business. After the end of the pandemic, we all celebrated a moment where we could actually get together and go and meet somebody in person. I met this person for the first time. And literally within a few minutes, we suddenly realized there was a collaborative thing going on that we could actually work together on and probably both see some benefit from. And you think, why did that never come out over all of those online meetings? And the answers are about body language and tonality, which you don't get. So there's the hearing, there's what you say, but there's also the further depth of meeting, the opportunity that you don't get, and we mustn't underestimate that as well. Okay, so
can I just add one thing?
Yeah, Jane, far away.
I think there's something else as well that we need to do when we're thinking about working with our teams, and that's about, we hear a lot now about values, and businesses use values like truth, integrity, trust, honesty, and all of these sorts of things. And I think it's really important, if you've got a team or you're part of a team, that you understand what your team values are and engage with the positive ones. If you want positive action, engage with the positive values and continually deliver against those positive values, because what you do will affect what you get back, as Vicky says. And I think it's really, when you're building a team, it's really important that the team understands what your values are.
Yeah,
even if you don't have conscious values, as in you're not an organization with 5 values written up on a board, you've still got values about how you work and the way that you work, and you need to make sure that they're understood.
And how those are communicated as well, because they're yes, and how you live your life type stuff, and it's that kind of game, isn't it? It's who you are as an individual. Yeah, no, I think that's good.
Yeah, there's a lady that's done some work on this, and it's around actually sitting down with a team and saying, right, what do we accept as a team? Do we persistently accept lateness? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do we need to change it? What are our other little habits that we have as a team that we subconsciously communicate to each other by accepting or not accepting them? And are they the right things to keep, or do we need to consciously, as a team, move away from them? And again, it's that building up that awareness of, as a team, what are you communicating to each other subconsciously by accepting or not accepting certain behaviours?
So the question I'd ask there is, yes, team dynamic in terms of getting a team to motivate and go in the same place. What happens if that place isn't the right place as the director of an organisation?
That would be about sitting down and having that conversation and saying, okay, I think that the norms within this team are not helping. How can we make those changes? How can we get everybody performing again? And quite often, if you're in a small organization, very difficult. In a larger organization, it's very often that you've maybe got one team that's misfiring and another that's doing really well. So it would be about, looking at what the situations are within those two teams. Jane's probably got some more to add on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting teams to all head in the right direction or do the things that you want them to do. It's back to the original communication, as Vicky said, clear messages about what it is that you expect or want from it. And I think there's a kind of positivity that we don't necessarily use in our communication that we could do. I mean, Vicky, obviously NLP trained. I did years and years ago, I think probably back in 2014. And one of the things that you learned was to manage expectations at the start of a conversation with a positive message about that conversation. So you can direct how people feel and react by the language you use. So if I say to you, this is a really good book, I've been reading it lately, and it will really help you with your language, you've already got a positive image of that book in your mind, even before you start. So you say, this is a really good project, it's going to be a trial and we're going to have a lot of work to do, but it's going to be really good for us to do it. You can change how people feel about that project even before you started telling them what it is.
So
it's about building the enthusiasm and building that sense of this is going to be a good thing.
So the garage mechanic who sucks his teeth, as we're about to tell you about what's got to do with the car, is, depending on your perspective, a classic, isn't it? It's setting a
Absolutely.
scene, which may or may not, of course, be a positive thing, but may or may not have an agenda that follows through from it.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. Yeah, no, very good. So look, we talked a little bit earlier about reacting. Now we've all done it. We've all been there for better and for worse. We've all had it done to us for better or worse. I just want to sort of touch on that a little bit. We all react in different ways, and especially when the pressure's on. And I don't know if anybody's been involved around the whole business of crisis communications. We're not going down that space right now, but that is a classic example where managing communication effectively, sharply, and efficiently without overreacting is important. But the flip side of the coin is how does stress play into our linguistic communications? How can we use stress to our advantage? How can stress be a disadvantage in managing teams? And do you have thoughts? I'm sure you will have thoughts, that's why you're here, about communicating and managing well in potentially stressful situations. And I'm drawing a slight distinction here, and you're welcome to go both ways. The kind of emergency, full-on, stressful, someone's got to take control situation. By the way, the office is on fire. What do we do now? Versus the I've got two people in the team who really aren't getting on and are about to go and have a fight like stress. How do we deal with that one? So, Jane, do you want to take that one first and just go wherever you will with this? It's quite a fascinating subject area.
Stress is a hugely fascinating topic, and it's something that came up on my TED Talks thing the other week, and it's the upside of stress, and it's a talk by Kelly McGonigal at TED Global, and she did it in 2013. Now she's a coach, and she taught people initially that you've got to manage your stress down. Stress is not good for you, but she has subsequently changed her mind because the perception that stress is not good for you is more likely to kill you. You're 55% more likely to die if you believe stress is not good for you than if you believe that stress is good for you and you need to use it. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. It's a fascinating TED Talk. It's funny and entertaining, but it's also absolutely spot on about how we use stress and whether if our belief that stress is bad for us is affecting our ability to handle stress. And the other thing is that none of us is working in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen. And I don't believe that we really need to react to stress by effing and blinding at everybody around us. I mean, we can have a stressful moment as long as we are not offending or directly impacting the people around us by, totally derailing everything that's going on with our language and our behaviour.
So I would agree, and I would say, stress, we've all been in the situation where it's stressful and you're going, oh my word, what's going to happen now? And actually that is a huge motivator, hopefully, if things are in the right position, to actually find solutions to situations that sometimes aren't as obvious. And if the stress wasn't there, you might never have looked for a solution, and the solution might take you to a better place. The communication around the stress is the really key point, because actually if you're in stress and you go and stick a head in a bucket and hope that you stay there until it all goes away, the chances are it won't. If you are in a stressful situation and you manage and plan your communications well, then you can end up in a better situation than you started with, and it's been motivated by the stress. So the comms around the stress, which are themselves dealt with the reactivity, which comes back to the space here, is what we're talking about, I think. And I think all the evidence of what you're saying is right, and I can completely relate to the TED Talk that says actually it's interesting what you say about the lack of, we're not worried about stress can kill you. I mean, if you look at the person who retires young, sits in a chair and does nothing with a nice non-stressful life, their life expectancy is far lower than somebody who goes out and gets involved and does a bit of this and actually, so that's all related as well. Vicky, what do you have an angle and a take on all this?
Yes, it's the difference between reacting and sort of manage it. Responding, I think, is the word that we need to look at. And I do a lot of talking around the fact with the teenagers particularly that if we had no stress, we wouldn't survive. We need stress to feel motivated. We need stress to kind of keep us going to get things done. And that's called eustress. And then we have a tipping point, and we all have different tipping points, which is when our resources to be able to deal with the stress are outstripped by the stress itself. And then that's when we tip into distress. So when we've tipped into distress, it's very destructive. It can change an assertive and independent person into an aggressive and dictatorial one, because they will be taking their normal behavior and it will become exaggerated in distress. So if you are in distress, you will be projecting all of that in your communication out towards your team. And you are likely to come across as a very different person. Now, the person that was very independent and assertive will become dictatorial and aggressive, but somebody who was previously maybe, quite correct, quite stable, all of that, they might just go into the shell and stop communicating completely. Everybody has different stress reactions. And I think the main thing here is to be able just to pause. So if you're in distress, pause. It's about being able to regulate your emotions. That's the biggest and most difficult thing in emotional intelligence, is about being able to regulate and manage your emotions. And it's about being able to say, okay, I'm feeling really stressed. I just need to take away from this, have a cup of tea, go for a walk outside, whatever you need to do. And then we're going to come back and talk about it. Because if you're communicating in a high emotional state of stress, it's not going to work. It's going to increase problems rather than decrease problems. But I think the big thing here is, as Jane was saying, it's about actually looking at that resilience factor, in that we've all got to experience stress, and being able to talk about it and say, look, are you getting to that point where actually do we need to help you put some things in place that would help you manage this better? And that will help work with the whole team as well and the organization, because at the end of the day, if people have tipped from eustress into distress, it's damaging your productivity, it's damaging the team dynamic, because there will be more stuff going on. There's a brilliant book that I believe all business owners and leaders should read, which is called Primal Leadership. Don't know where it is, can't find it at the moment. Primal Leadership by Daniel Goleman and a couple of other people, which I can't remember. And it talks about the 6 main management styles and when to use them. And different situations will require a different leadership style and a different type of communication, basically.
Brilliant. And I think that message about pausing is a very important one. Because I mean, in the medical world, that's some of the reasons why there's a lot of politeness in a surgery theatre, and using full titles is because it slows down the communication and makes sure mistakes are less likely. And that is also a cue which we find around the place to start using tools like humour. Humour is a great one, and smiling. There's an actual chemical. I mean, I found this out recently from this piece I was relating to earlier. But if you smile, there is an actual chemical neurological thing that goes on in your brain, irrespective of what's actually going on. And so there are tools in communication that slow the process down, create pauses, and create a time to just de-escalate. And then sort of the final thing I'd add to that is also, we've all been there, we've all been a bit ragged, we've all kind of lost our temper with something. You often don't know you're doing it. Sometimes it takes a third party to bring it home. And that can work two ways. Sometimes you can see that going on in someone you're trying to manage, and so how you de-escalate somebody else, and actually you need to be listening out for the cue that says, hang on a minute, I've lost the plot here, I need to slow down and pause. So these are really good things. Need to move on because I'm aware of the time here, and it's a great conversation that we've got going on here. I think I want to wrap a couple of I want to just ask, just turn to selling, because that's a situation where quite often we use communication in a very performance-based, specific way. What's your take on how communication is used within a team when it comes to selling? Jane, do you want to take that first?
I think, yeah, interesting. I think this book, I'm reading Exactly What to Say by Phil M. Jones right at the moment. And he actually gives you some really good clues on some techniques for communicating and closing deals and some words to use around that. But I think there's a the thing we need to do with communication in teams when we're selling is ensure who knows who's giving what message.
Yeah, brand messaging and sales
Yeah.
messaging. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And who's responsible for which part of that process? Because when there's three or four of you working as a team selling something, you can get into the tripping over each other and sometimes contradicting each other without even realizing you're doing it. So being absolutely clear that each of you has a role to play, or that when you're selling, you're reinforcing the same messages and
Mm-hmm.
only adding to the product you're selling, whether it's you, whether it's people, whether it's, whatever it is you're selling. It's really important. Again, it's going back to making sure your communication is based out, start at the beginning and work your way through your communication process. If you're going to be selling to customers as a team, start at the beginning. Who's going to walk into the room first, all the way down to, if you get a question about this, who's going to deal with it? If you get a question about that, who's going to deal with it?
I think that's great, and something we also see quite a bit of is if you get a business owner or someone who really believes in their business and they're enthusiastic about the business, which is one of the key plays for selling, but that enthusiasm can then lead you to overcomplicate and go too far, and that's something that needs a bit of thinking through. And if you're a manager of that situation, managing as well. Vicky, what's your thoughts about the selling and communications?
I think one of the, just to kind of continue, is behavioral flexibility. So you know what you've got, but when you're speaking to a person on the phone, it's about really listening to that person and saying, actually, this approach is going to work better with this person based on what they're saying rather than this approach, and being able to adapt your behavior. And that's something the team needs to think about. If you get this type of person, how are you going to react to them? What behavior? Things like in sales, for example, if you have someone who talks very fast like this, if you want to talk very fast like that back at them, they'll think that's great. If you've got someone who's really quiet and is talking really slowly, you need to quieten down and talk slowly to them as well. So it's just about being able to flex your behavior so that you're matching that other person on the end and you're kind of meeting them where they need to be whilst still giving the message over to them. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, so we're back into the world of listening, hearing and listening, and responding to that way and measuring your communication. But look, that's been really interesting, and there are a couple of questions that I haven't logged in there, as Vicky and Jane will know, because we are running up against the time, and we always do this to Jill, who's got this great business kitchen plans coming up, and always gets squashed out at the end, and I don't want to do that. But has anyone got any immediate questions for Vicky or Jane? It doesn't matter if you have or you haven't, and we can come back to it later. But if anybody has, put your hand up now. Otherwise, I'm going to say, Jill, well, I'm going to say thank you very much to both Vicky and Jane. That's been really interesting. We'll get this up online and edited. Jill, over to you.